So we have 4 students, guys, come on over. We have 4 students, okay, who are going to grab chairs here, and maybe Steph, you grab the microphone there and we can move it between us, okay? So you guys sit down first and make yourself comfortable. Don't worry, these people are much more nervous of you than you are of them, okay? Because you're the real thing, okay? So I suppose firstly to acknowledge and to thank our students for taking the time out. And indeed, thank you. All right. Okay. And so maybe just quickly to introduce, so we have Steffi here. Steffi has finished her Master's in Education Development Studies here at UNSW, and she's her undergraduate studies in India. Okay, so she's an international student, and she's just finished her Master's level here. She's beside Douche, who's a domestic student here at University UNSW, and he's a 4th-year medicine student. Okay, beside Jake, who's come from University of Nottingham, and Jake, there's lots of your gang here. Jake is in 2nd year economics in Nottingham, and he's here for a semester-long exchange or programme. And then Nanny at the end is a 3rd-year sociology student from University of Edinburgh. She's here in a 1-year exchange, and actually she's from Sweden, just to add to the whole international feel. So she ticks a whole range of U21 boxes for us. So guys, you're really welcome. As I said to you before we kicked off, they've seen a video here of some other students, undergraduate students, who spoke a little bit about personalised learning, what it meant to them. And you know, our students here are going to talk a little bit about what they understand personalised learning to be. And I've also asked them to think or to talk to us a little bit about experiences that they've had, concrete experiences of stuff that has worked for them, that they would put into that space of being quite an important personalised learning experience. So Steffi, because you have the microphone, would you mind kicking off just in terms of what personalised learning means to you? And we can move it from there.
Sure.
Thanks.
So for me, I think personalised learning is mainly about taking ownership of my learning. Because mostly in high school, when you're sort of studying, you are sort of being told what to do, and at university you do get the choice of, you know, what you're going to choose to study. And I think there has to also be a choice of how you go about that learning, and to be able to make the most of that learning. I think there's a bit of responsibility, obviously, on part of the student, but also on part of the teaching staff and the university as well. And I think what worked for me in my program here at UNSW, which was very different from my study in India, because there was in India there's not as much focus on critical thinking, which I really loved here. What did work for me here was courses where the lecturers and the assessment tasks were more practical, and sort of I think one of the students mentioned just giving people a bit of breathing room, room to reflect on their learning. So for example, a course I did on UN and advocacy, we were tasked to create a campaign and choose whatever sort of subject we felt passionate about. And so at the start of the semester, we chose to work with on child marriage in Yemen. And so for the course of the entire semester, we developed a campaign incorporating the knowledge that we were learning through the lectures. And at the end of it, we presented it back to our classroom. But I think the amount of knowledge that I gained over those 13 weeks, just engaging with my colleagues and with the subject matter, I will take that with me in the field, and that just works so much better than courses that are primarily focused on theoretical knowledge or just essay-based assessments. So yeah, I think for me that really worked well. Yeah.
That's fine, I'll come back again. Yeah.
So when I think of personalised learning, I think of that quote where if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So for me, personalised learning is about empowering a student to access knowledge and then respecting them and giving them the independence to comprehend that knowledge in their own way. And from a university point of view, when they've come and they've understood their concept in their own way, to come and let them apply that concept to a practical real-world setting, which I think is the most engaging way to understand your core content.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I think it's important to engage the students. So rather than having a rigid way of learning where everyone learns the same thing and there's not really any space to explore, I think it's important for people to find their own interest in things. So I think that the reason that's been less emphasised is because of the emphasis on exams and learning for exams. And so, but I think overall, when you give people the ability to explore, they can find an interest in it. and that will help overall, because overall, one, they've got an interest in it, they will go to explore themselves and find out more, and overall they will do better in exams and in our future life after university.
I think that in terms of personalized learning, it's really important to see how you're tailoring it to the individual. Because I feel like often when you talk about personalized learning, is about focusing on the individual's career and the job market that individual is trying to reach, instead of focusing on fostering the individual's curiosity, and that way making the student be engaged and want to be engaged and find other platforms to learn and deepen their knowledge in the topic, regardless of whether or not that helps them in terms of a career.
Nani, since you have the microphone, you spoke a little bit before we started around a really good class or program you've taken here in UNSW. Do you want to speak a little bit around that?
Sure, yeah. It's a creative writing course, so it would be quite different from, say, economics or medicine, but it's been tailored really well to be a workshopping focused course. So in tutorials, the tutor is there more as a facilitator, and the students all act as mentors to each other. So we were speaking earlier about the importance of teaching and how teaching lets you understand the knowledge that you yourself are learning. But this kind of allows students to teach in a way that doesn't require them to be very outspoken necessarily, but more reflective, and incorporate that reflection into the editing process of the works of other people, and that way learning from each other.
Does anybody else? Douche, you had some, again, I suppose it's quite a medicine example in terms of some of the stuff around how you've had opportunities to engage with be mentored as such as part of your education. And although it's quite a medicine-specific example, I think it's quite applicable across. So maybe to talk a little bit around that.
Yeah, so I was sharing before that teaching is part of sort of the culture in medicine, and it's taught to you very early that the industry and the profession works by peers teaching peers. So if right from a young age, first-year students are paired with second-year students, second-year students are paired with third-year students. So to develop that mentorship-mentee relationship where some people have a little bit more experience and a little bit more understanding, and they can feed that into the younger students. And that helps the older students, and it helps the younger students who might understand a teaching style of a peer more than a lecturer, for example. And that relationship continues now that we go into a clinical setting. So we, after third year, we're pretty much at hospital full time. And we were talking earlier about how there's that division where you want a mentor in your career to sort of help you pursue what you're interested in rather than the job you want to get. And sort of the way medicine brings that together is by giving you access to clinicians who are working in the hospitals who've had similar interests to you and who have pursued career opportunities that those interests lead to. And so by giving you access to those mentors in a practical setting, you are able to sort of see what you might, see role models that you want to emulate yourself, and to get advice all the time about what you should be doing to pursue your interest in the most constructive and productive way. And I think that's been incredibly good for my own personalised form of learning.
Steffi, do you want to contribute on just that kind of second question, which is what can the institution do to better personalise your learning? And again, you reflected earlier on experiences here and experiences in India.
Yeah. Just sort of following on what Douche was saying, and I think you mentioned it, that's something that I would have loved to have in my program, and which I don't think is available, and it could very possibly be incorporated across the board. Just that idea of, because I was at a master's level program where we actually had a pool of students within the classroom in the field primarily, but there was no opportunity for us to actually engage in that sort of mentorship. Just because of time constraints, because we were so focused on rolling out the assessments and getting the tasks done that there was no room for further interaction, and I think just sort of gaining field knowledge. So I think a lot of it has to do with, I think, also revisioning the teacher or the lecturer in the classroom, because I think while a lot of our lecturers are academics, some of them do lack, I feel, the ability to put across some of the information sometimes. And not to be harsh, but sometimes I'm just sitting there going, like, this person's brilliant, and the information that they are giving out is brilliant, but I think there could be some sort of mentorship for the teachers as well to how to go about just conveying that information or getting us really engaged. And apart from that, I think in sort of planning the assessment task, a lot of the courses where we had assessments weekly and just sort of working towards grades and, high distinctions, I think we spent so much time just focusing on that grade at the end of the semester that we lost sight of what we were learning. And so some of the students mentioned in the video just moving from a solely grade-based assessment culture to a more feedback-based assessment culture, but I think which would be really helpful, because that means you're constantly working on your material to get it better and to improve it. And I think that would be really good for students, because that's something that you would do anywhere after you finish your degree as well, because you don't get a high distinction for the work you do in the field. You just get feedback on it, and you just have to improve on it. So I think that's something that universities could potentially look into.
Jake, you spoke a little bit earlier around, again, the importance of, even when you're doing a degree in economics, not getting pigeonholed in a particular way towards a career, but having some flexibility throughout that. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so I was just saying that I think it's important that these degrees don't focus primarily on one role. Like, I've been in work experience before where we've had people from different degrees. So in a finance-related role, there's been people from biology, say, or law, and that I find that a good thing, because that means that people have obviously taken the opportunity to explore something that's not perhaps related to their degree as much. And I think that's important with personalised learning, because it means that although you find the subject interesting, you engage with it in a different way, so everyone's not all thinking the same thing or thinking the same way. So if you let people be creative and let people explore what they find interesting about that, or what works well for them in terms of approaching a presentation is maybe better for them, or some other type of learning may be better. And I think that is important, because then people can explore what they're best at.
Can I maybe open to the floor? I'm sure our students will continue to contribute, but do people have questions or reactions? And we have a microphone here. Great.
First of all, let me thank you for doing this. It's scary to face this many faculty, and so you're doing a great job. And if I'm being complimentary, I'm about to ask you a hard question. So let me ask you the hard question. There's an opportunity in personalized learning to let you take control. You all kind of talked about that. Move in particular styles that fit your learning style, do things that really fit your goals. But then there's a danger, I think, which is that you can stay in your comfort zone. And for many of us, part of our job as educators is to stretch you until you almost break. Sometimes we overdo it, but we want to push you out of your comfort zone, because that's going to make you more effective. So my question is, as students, what do you think your role is to work with institutions so that you don't just stay in your comfort zone? How do you take control of actually pushing the boundaries or working to push the boundaries?
I'm just going to reflect on some of my own experience from medicine again. We have a system where we are very independent in the way we learn. Our learning at hospital, we get taught very little. It's sort of hands-on knowledge, and it's being quizzed on the ward round, as you see on all those shows like Scrubs and things like that. But what motivates us to learn is that factor that we're going to go in tomorrow in front of a patient we don't know, with a clinician who's going to ask us every single thing possible about that patient. And he's going to put us out of our comfort zone. So I better do my job and not look like, a fool tomorrow in front of the patient, in front of my peers, in front of the doctor, by not reading up as thoroughly as I should. And they're going to ask you the hardest questions, those concepts that you don't want to learn. But the thing is, we get the freedom to learn them in the way we want to learn, with our peers, with our own strategies, which we've sort of been fostered to build from the first day in medicine. So that's how we sort of still get pushed despite being independent in the way we learn.
Jake, do you want to react to
Yeah, I'm just kind of extending on that point, but I think there is a good point that people can get in their comfort zone, especially when they choose what they're studying or they're using their own techniques, which have obviously worked, but it's good to reach out. So I think that, as we were saying before about the facilitator, that it's good to push questions which challenge people. So rather than having in tutorials, for example, a question and answer, there's just, you're going through the question and answer, there's only one answer to each question, rather ask questions that make people think, and particularly in a way that they haven't perhaps thought about it before, just to gauge a reaction, which doesn't have to be, like, just by gauging that reaction, you're making them think outside the box and making them think in a different way, and it doesn't have to be as rigid by having the question and answer.
Anybody else? Stephanie's going to touch on it as well.
Yeah. So yeah, I do think there's quite a bit of danger when you give free rein, but I think there could be a balance struck where, in terms of, because when we look at courses, there's the objectives or the learning objectives of the course, and I think it was possible for the student to sort of look at that and say, okay, these are things that I sort of want, but there's additional things that I want to learn from the course as well. Sort of drafting your own learning objectives at the start of the program and working with that. So you do have that goal, that you're sort of going to reach, and as a lecturer or a mentor, you'd be there to sort of push us at times that we sort of start taking the easy route, but sort of starting off with an objective and working towards that, I think would be helpful as well.
Okay. Any other? Sure, we have other questions. Maeve, there behind.
I'm just interested in just kind of gauging your sense of, is this nice to have? Is this essential to have? And I was taken by the specific example of maybe having a lecture that wasn't communicating particularly well to you. And I suppose I wanted to ask you the flip side, the case for this. What are the costs to you of the absence of personalised learning, or indeed of having a lecture that doesn't communicate as well as they could? Could you articulate some costs for us? Thanks.
Did anyone want to start?
So do you mean like what sort of the negatives of that sort of situation?
Yeah, what's the consequence for you? I suppose just really to spell it out for us.
Yeah. So I think in classes where I found that the lecturers just unable to sort of communicate, we just start the engagement level. You can sort of sense the entire room, kind of the sort of sense of urgency to sort of ask questions kind of reducing. Whereas if you were to take a classroom where the lecturer was sort of engaging with content or relevant experiences and just pushing discussion a bit, everybody's sort of bursting, sort of just waiting there to contribute to the conversation. And you leave that class feeling like, okay, we've engaged. You go up and you look up the different things that you've talked about. Whereas in a classroom where the facilitator was sort of unable to do that, you leave class just going, yeah, I'm just going to work to get the grade at the end of it, but I'm not really going to engage with it because they've not. I think it's igniting that fire, which I think a lot of that's an important skill from a point of view of a lecturer. Just getting that spark going, and then we can take it forward. But I think the ability to do that is very, very crucial. Yeah.
Jake, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, just I think that engagement is really important, because the consequence is that although you're getting an artificial kind of sense of your rote learning, so it's stuff that you will forget in a couple of years, it's stuff that doesn't stick with you, doesn't engage you, and I think that obviously every university here is trying to engage people and trying to give that higher level of education, which means that people can feel like they're enjoying learning and they're getting something out of it, whereas I think when you're just learning simple facts, or you're not properly engaging it but you're just learning it for the exam or just learning it as it is, then you don't really engage, you don't enjoy, and it just provides a lot worse experience of education, I think.
Okay, yeah, I think it kind of depends on what the university is really trying to achieve. If you're trying to end up with students who, can go into a certain career, or who just have, who know facts that you wanted them to learn throughout their university degree, then I think a very traditional approach could work. But if the university is there to question knowledge and to lead to new innovations, and for students to, once they finish university and also during university, to take their own initiative to really explore and engage with the knowledge and use it in different platforms, then I think personalized learning is essential.
First of all, congratulations on your bravery. I think you're doing a great job. Can I pose a question for Dush, please? Generally speaking, the curriculum in universities is a bit of a territorial battleground where people are vying for credits and trying to stake their claim for credits in your curriculum. And in the medical curriculum, it's often typified like that. But there's been a move generally towards introducing the humanities into the medical curriculum. And the view commonly is that this helps you to explore your own personality and your own non-scientific self. How important do you feel that is for you as a doctor to develop an understanding of yourself, and what sort of benefits do you see coming from that in terms of your eventual practice as a doctor?
I think you bring up a really topical issue in sort of our tertiary education right now, which is something that's looked at a little bit cynically by a few of the clinicians who have graduated, who says you guys waste a lot of time talking about your feelings and talking about how to be nice to each other and how to tell someone that you're sorry for them when they tell you some bad news. I think it's really important. I think it's a good thing that's happening. I think given that, from a very early stage, you start seeing some pretty traumatic things in the hospital setting that you're probably not mature enough. We have an undergraduate entry system here. So you've got 18, 19-year-old students who are going and seeing life and death sort of situations. And that's obviously taxing. And I think it's very good that from a very early stage, the university's been there and said, here's a way to deal with your feelings. Here's a way to reflect on your feelings. And it's a productive process, and it's something you should share with your peers, with your mentors. And it's something that's important for not only now, but long term, when doctors and healthcare professionals have notoriously bad rates of depression, anxiety issues, suicidality. So I think it's fantastic that it's happening now. I think the cost of that is, you've got to draw a fine line, because I think we're doing, from the doctor's point of view, we're doing a lot of that stuff now. And that stuff taking time of class means that some of the course competencies that you need to know are getting a little bit diminished, which is obviously as important as well. So I think it's about getting that balance right, but I definitely think it's good that it's gone this way. But we should be wary of sort of pushing it a little too much, because sometimes we have these sessions 2 to 3 times a week and have anatomy, which is pretty important, knowing where everything is in the body, once a week. So just a practical example of that.
Thanks, and once again, it's great that you're there. I know it must be an interesting experience for you. I'm going to change tack a little bit. The couple of conversations we've had have been around how universities use the enormous volume of data that we collect about all of our students as they go through. Now, the data is there, but at the moment, virtually in all the universities in the room, we're not systematically using that information. I'd be interested in you as students. How would you feel if, and to use Eric's example from this morning, we suddenly looked a whole lot more like Amazon, and we had the flash up that says 17 out of 20 students who've struggled at this point found this useful, and there was that greater sense of, yeah, you might be getting personalised input, but that slightly spooky oversight. And I'd be really interested in how you feel if we started systematically using that data to help personalise your experience, but in a way that is very different to the way we do now. I'd be just interested in your responses.
So yeah, I think this is going to could have different views, but I'll just go for mine. So yeah, I think personally that is a good idea, especially as if instead of trying to force it on people, you're giving them an option to see what people have found useful in the past, and especially with data you've collected like feedback on lectures, etc. That unis are doing a lot. I think I've had it for every module now, and I think it's a good idea, but that's still not being utilised enough. I feel there are lectures like in Nottingham, I know that the lecturer, it shows what past students have said and then what the lecturer is doing to improve this. But sometimes the lecturer won't write out as the criticisms, or because it's the lecturer on in charge of actually writing out and making the changes. So I think that's important that they utilise the information of the data. So as you were saying, providing people options of how to personalise their experience, and the feedback where they say what they're doing about what people have said in the past. So it's all well and good, like having these surveys and saying how would you find the lectures, what do you think could be done better, but unless that's used well, then I don't think it has much utility.
Does anybody else?
Oh, just had another response to that as well, because we have we have the cat-eye that they do here for so at the end of every semester for like a feedback and evaluation, but I almost feel like it's going into the void, and just sort of, you know, we're sending out this information, but we're not really engaging with anybody to actually say, okay, this is going to be done and incorporated, because there's students in the past who come and tell us, okay, did that change actually happen? And we go, no, it's still happening the same way. The things are still going the same way. So I think just having forums, faculty specific even at a smaller level, to sort of engage with the subject and go, okay, how can we revamp the course? How can we sort of actually, you know, make changes that students would sort of find really useful and see that happening? I think that would be beneficial. Yeah.
From my personal point of view, I agree to an extent, but what I would find more useful than something flashing up on my screen saying this could be a useful option for you is something a bit more personalized. So rather than keep all those people who filled out feedback forms as data, maybe make a database of people that the student can call that they have access to, because I feel talking to a person is much more useful than having a suggestion pop up on my screen. And maybe organizing, like we have these meet and greet sort of events all the time where we have people who've been through what we've been through in a room and you just chat to them about it. And sometimes having that human contact is much, even in the technological world, is so much more helpful. Yeah.
Nani, do you want to contribute on that one?
I'd just like to say that I think we also need to question the feedback forms and how useful the responses actually are. It's like very often the questions are like, was your tutorial good, yes or no? And you're like, yeah, it was fine. Lecture, yeah, fine. And then there might actually be other methods of learning that would be so much more useful, but you never really question that or delve that deep into questioning your learning process when filling out like an online feedback form. So I think having like focus groups or discussions into the way you're learning would be a lot more useful.
Thank you, and I think that was very interesting in terms of the data piece working both ways, in terms of the data we have on students, but also the data we have on ourselves and how we use it. Can I though reframe Ian's question a little bit, because the other piece Ian was touching on is that you'd imagine, and we all operate in our universities VLE systems and our virtual learning environments and library systems, and there's a big digital footprint that as students, and indeed all of us, leave in our path here as we engage in study, or as you engage in your studies. And so there is an emerging area around data analytics or academic analytics, where in fact the system's collecting information all the time around how you're performing, how you're engaging, are you downloading materials, are you going to the library compared to your are you getting submissions in time, and that data is there. And so there is an interesting debate or conversation now around how might that data most usefully be used to support your best performance and your best engagement in a program. And you're absolutely right in terms of coming back with the piece, which is how best we use the data that we have in our systems around how we perform. But do you have a sense of and that can go to a whole range, as we heard from a keynote yesterday, whole range of sophistication in terms of how that data might be used. Do you have a reaction to that piece? So the system is constantly harvesting data and could use that. Any reaction?
No.
Okay. No, I just had a penny drop moment. Like, of course, that would be collected. The amount of times I download lecture slides or watch the lecture instead of go to a lecture. And I think that's useful information. I think a lot of my peers in my course sort of figure out in the first couple of years, for this decision of personalizing the learning, that it's tough to go to a lecture who's extremely an expert in what they're speaking about and will throw information at you for an hour. A few of us realized very early on, why go to the lecture? Watch it online, watch it slowly, Google words as they go. And then sort of you can do it once rather than go to the lecture, leave feeling confused and say, I'm going to go and listen to this online again. So rather than do it twice, do it once properly. And if I think your data that's being collected will show that a lot more students are listening to lectures online rather than actually turning up at the lectures. And I think that's useful data for the university to know. And I think it's helpful to say maybe rather than have lectures, we should have question for the lectures, like a tutorial setting, where people have done the content will come and either apply the concepts or ask what they were confused about. I would find that more useful.
But what about if somebody said, you haven't gone to 16 lectures, you haven't borrowed a library book, and you're late on that assignment, we think you're in trouble, do you want to come and talk to us? Would that annoy you, or would you be happy to receive that information that we've generated just by looking at your profile?
I guess it would be, but I think there isn't really much of an opportunity for that to happen in our course because you have tutorials after every lecture where you can, maybe if you graded those tutorials about how competent you seem to be with the lecture material, you could catch it at an earlier stage that a student wasn't engaging rather than let it get to that 16-week point. Because that's what happens with us. We get, we're assessed on our contribution to every tutorial. And if you haven't done the work, you will not look like you know anything in the tutorial. And so I think you know a lot quicker than letting it get to that point.
Yeah, just a small thing about that. So it is an interesting point. And I think that is important, that there is the opportunity to speak to someone, because I could say, oh, I don't understand anything, help, it's too much for me. But then alternatively, I could be doing something, have a different method where I'm finding it fine, and I didn't think that I should be told off because I've done a different method to the one method that they give to us. So I think that it's more like an opportunity to speak to someone if you are finding it hard, but it shouldn't be compulsory. You haven't gone to this many tutorials, you haven't gone to this many lectures, you need to talk to us, even if I'm getting the top grades.
And I think it also depends on whether that's the one student who has that track record or whether it's a majority, and sort of identifying problems that are happening that sort of may be occurring and using that data to then say, identify areas where there seems to be some sort of discrepancy, that something's not working, and then sort of get feedback on what's what's going on or what's going wrong. And I think so it could be utilized in a majority of ways if it's interpreted correctly, and then actually taken forward to bring about some change, I guess.
Nani, do you want to contribute on that one? Are you okay?
I'm okay.
That's fine. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Do we have other questions from the floor? Oh, you're fading fast on the students. Oh, Simon, I spoke too soon. Stephen and Simon, it's either or.
Okay, I'm just going to push on the data thing one more time from a different angle now. Okay, so can you imagine if the university gave you a kind of dashboard that showed you how you were doing? But not just the university giving you data, you're also running a whole load of different stuff on your phones about your life. Can you fantasize a little bit science fiction, if necessary? What would you love to be able to see? What would that dashboard be telling you about your time at university? And it might be the stuff you do officially at university, and you might want to look at how it relates to the rest of your life. Not that you'd have to necessarily share that with the university, but I'm just wondering whether anything pops into mind, right? You may do running, and you're used to looking at graphs about your running or your diet or your sleep. You probably on social networks that might tell you things. If you use Twitter or social media, it might tell you how many followers you have, what kind of impact you have on people. I'm just wondering, does anything pop into mind if I said, imagine your learner dashboard in 2020 or something?
I guess it depends on, because for me it almost seems like it's fairly quantitative, and it's numbers and it's things you're doing, but in terms of experiences, it probably wouldn't be able to sort of latch on to that. And so for me it would be a fairly superficial kind of, it will give you an idea of how you're going, I guess, and it would be good to know, but I think in terms of experiences, I would know better, or the people I'm interacting with would know better, because it would be conversations around it. So for me, it wouldn't be too beneficial, I guess, but others may have different.
Just a small thing. So I don't know in all different examples, but one example, if lecturers gave readings that I think sometimes they give these readings which are done by people, PhD students, who are it's completely unreadable. But then if they give something that's interesting around around the subject, and you see how many times this is read by other students in your lecture, or if what they've rated this out of 5, just theoretically speaking. So to see if I see that this has been out of my 400 lecture, like 200 people have read this and they've rated it 4.5 out of 5, then I'm going to be like, oh, this must be a good read and must be useful to engaging. So I think that's kind of a different, like they have it on like news websites about most read, most shared, or stuff like that. So yeah.
I'd just like to say that my immediate reaction is that it seems like an attempt for universities to use technology just for the sake of using technology, which I feel happens quite a lot, instead of looking at how, like, what the best method to achieving the end is and whether technology plays into that or not, rather than looking at technology like, this is brand new, this is going to look so good, how can we use this in any way possible?
I have a different approach with that. That really excited me when you brought that up. I'm a bit of a numbers person myself, and like one of the things from a personal point of view that I struggle with at university, and I think anyone who's doing a degree which takes a lot of time, is I'm really committed to trying to maintain a balance in my life. And I'm passionate about some of my sports that I play. I'm passionate about, seeing my friends. I'm passionate about having a life when doing a degree which can really consume a lot of your time. And it's very easy to do. So I would, from a very superficial level, just like to see how much of my time I spend doing what. Because this year, one of my New Year's resolutions was, I don't want to give up playing golf. I don't want to give up playing cricket. Those are the things I love more than anything else. I'd like to tabulate how much time during a week I spend actually studying medicine, actually pursuing my passion, and looking back and saying, am I achieving the balance that I want? And am I happy with that? Yeah.
Steve, another question.
Great, thanks. I want to thank you again just for being willing to share all your experiences, and it's really fantastic. Over the last couple of days, we've been talking about personalising learning, and we've been thinking about different aspects of that. And we've been talking about things like personalising what you learn, and I think you've given us some great examples of that. We've been talking about personalising how you learn, and again, you've shared with that, and also where you learn. One other aspect that we've touched on is personalising the pace at which you learn, the idea that you learn at a different pace to somebody else. And I'm not sure I've picked up any examples from you of that as yet. And I don't know whether you've just got any comments about whether you have any experience of that, or whether really just the way our institutions work is that everyone, we kind of lock you into these semesters, start at this point, finish at this point, and there's not much flexibility. So I don't know whether you've got experience of that, and that you'd be willing to share. And if you haven't, whether you have any comments about whether you think that's important or not.
Yeah, so I have got personal experience from this. From when I did French modules last year, and we had different levels of ability. And there's a few things to say about this, because I thought that was really good, because my French wasn't as good as some others, and the university sometimes naturally assumes everyone's the same level because they've got the same grades to get there and whatever. But then what's important is to make sure that these tutorials don't contribute to the degrees, so that it's not about if you go in these, you're going to get a worse grade. It's about you're going to learn differently or take it in more depth. So I think sometimes we had tutorials so that it affected, by being in a lower class, I got a lower grade. So that when the tutorials were more like emphasizing on just encouraging you to learn more about it, it can be different paces, I think.
Yeah, I think I might have switched this off. Hello? Yep. The first few weeks of university for me were quite confronting for exactly that reason. I got into a group which is synonymous with a lot of very intelligent people, and I felt very quickly that these people were learning at a much higher rate than me, and it's sort of like a survival of the fittest sort of thing got evoked, that I would have to lift myself, and I feel like I have to sort of stay with my group, who are considerably intelligent. But how that you manage that from a university point of view, I'm not very sure, but I do agree it's an issue. That's my insight, yeah.
So just from experience, I was just chatting with my flatmate about this yesterday, and I asked her what sort of personalized learning meant to her, and whether universities could do anything different. And she looked at me and she said, "Well, she said, I think university is doing everything just fine. It's just me, I don't fit in." And that was her response. But I went, wait a minute, is that what you think? Is that because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of other people who think the exact same thing because they're not keeping up or because they feel they're falling behind. And I think that's something to touch upon, because she's been stressed out over the semesters and the last few semesters, and that's her feeling, that she's not meant for university, and she's going to be happy when she gets done with the degree. But I think universities could sort of look at how they could, I guess, space out assessments maybe, or just sort of give a little bit of flexibility in terms of catering to different learning styles, and just like pace things out for students. Yeah.
I'm going to stand up because I'm hiding at the back behind the camera. Well, I hope you're not getting sort of tired of receiving compliments and praise, because I'm going to give you another one. If someone would have asked me to do this as an undergraduate student, sit in front of people who supposedly know an awful lot about learning and teaching for about 45 minutes, I'd have been in pieces. And I think all of you speak really eloquently and convincingly about your experiences, so thank you. So after the praise, the tough question, and it's going to be deeply personal. And it's about motivation, because one of my colleagues expressed this as, if a student is motivated to learn something, there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop them. And so, if you could you describe an instance in your studies where you felt tremendously motivated about something, and also detail why you felt that level of motivation? What was it that led you to feel like that?
Okay, when I first started university, I expected every lecture to be like a TED Talk. And then I was sort of disappointed, realizing that wasn't the case. But then I found that what motivates me the most is society's as part of the university experience, but not through my courses. So things like getting involved in like Amnesty and the Fossil Free campaign as well. And because I'm studying sociology, that's all quite related, and that has all been really linked to the courses I've chosen. So very often I find myself doing readings and reading articles for these campaigns, and then realizing that, actually this fits really well into the course I'm studying, and then delving deeper into the readings for those courses and seeing how that fits into these clubs and societies that I'm doing outside of my degree.
I think a personal experience for me was in economics. I was doing market failure, and I found that particularly interesting because of how it related to the real world, and I could see different examples of this and the different theories proposed that we were studying and how they worked or how badly they might have worked in practice. And I thought that was interesting because then I could see how it applied, and it wasn't just learning it for the sake of learning it. So I think it's important to get like case studies and different examples of why this is useful that you're learning it, so you don't just feel like you're learning it for the sake of it.
While I was doing my Masters of Education, one of the courses we had was for autism spectrum disorders. And at the time, I was also doing part-time work in a preschool, and we did have a student enroll who was on the spectrum. And the task was to design a sort of like a booklet for teachers on how to go about interacting with the student who had autism. And for me, that sort of immediately clicked, because I was in the classroom having to sort of, best facilitate this child's education, and I was required to do this course. So the motivation for me was internal, and I was driven to kind of research as much as I could, and sort of keeping in mind my situation, but also that this was this exact same situation a lot of other teachers would be going through as well. So yeah, sort of finding, I guess, in terms of what you could utilize best in your day-to-day sort of field experience as well.
I think everyone here has talked about an experience which they've had, and I think that in itself seems to be like experiences motivate you, and mine's no different. I mean, at the beginning of last year, I was beginning my research year, and I was in the emergency department late at night, and there was a guy who came in who was stabbed in the chest. And so, I mean, retrospectively looking back at this now, it was almost the perfect learning environment. We had the surgeon who was leading the case, and I was at the back of the room just sort of watching, and there was a junior doctor who was there explaining everything that was happening to me as it was happening. And just seeing the approach that the senior surgeon took into understanding what was going on from the vital signs about what was happening inside the body, of applying first principle things that I'd been taught about in the first 2 years of medicine, but having that explained to me by someone who was making it relatable to me and seeing it all happen just motivated me so much to go back and learn the things I'd said, like, this stuff is boring, I'll never really apply it. But seeing it happen was one of the most sort of, you know, you were talking before about inciting a fire within you to sort of learn. That was one of the things that really helped me, seeing it happen firsthand.
The whole message on experiential learning is so strong in that. Is there any other questions? John.
Thanks for your sharing. I want to return to the question on the type of data we collect from you. Simon asked about the science fiction. What if we take the Big Brother approach? We collect psychometric data every year on you and report back to you. We collect your entire digital footprint within our systems in the university and maybe extend beyond into what you do in your social media and analyze at a microgenetic level what you're doing in your learning processes.
I think my view is going to differ from everyone else, but I think, as I said before, I'd be very interested to see what it shows. But the thing is, the difference, I wouldn't hold it as gospel. I would just look at it as a perspective, at one way of gauging how I was engaging myself. And I think if you take it with a pinch of salt like that, I think it would be very interesting reading, personally.
Anybody else want to answer that one?
I think it's sort of the same thing as personalized learning and everybody having different learning styles and also probably everybody not being on board with that. And I think, you know, it just sort of, it's touch and go, where some people would really appreciate that sort of information, whereas others would find that very invasive and kind of maybe a bit too much.
Well, the argument we're making is that we want to bring much more of the person into personalized learning, and we need to know much more about you psychologically. We need to actually profile you in some ways to learn what you're doing inside of our systems. Is that going too far?
But I think going back on the thing I said about qualitative information, I think if you were sitting down with me or like just in a forum and having conversations, I would personally prefer that to just having that information broadly out there in my digital footprint. I think just having being able to see the person I'm talking to, and if they use my information or the experiences I've had to better the system, I would have no issues with that, but I'd prefer that method to the one you're suggesting. Yeah.
Sorry, just to play it out, but then there's what you say, and then there's what you actually do, and then I don't really, there's things I like to say I do, but I wouldn't be sure if I actually do them. Like,
I understand the point, and I think that they've both made good points. So I think it's okay, majority of the time, collecting that data if it is used, but a large proportion of the time, people will collect that data and they won't do anything about it, and then people get suspicious about why that data has been collected if it hasn't been used. And what Steffi was saying is important as well, because although we do these things, you can only gain a certain amount of understanding from that, as we may do it and then realise we're doing something wrong, or we might do it and prefer to do something else, which you wouldn't know if you just saw what we were doing.
and I think one thing that might help you push that campaign along, because from a medical point of view, we do research all the time on patients that come in through hospital, but one of the things we guarantee them is that any data we collect is de-identified, and they can never trace back to who actually said what. It's on a population level. And so from that point of view, I don't know if you feel more comfortable that as a population of university students, they're gauging what we're doing. I don't know.
Have we any other questions? I see a signal over here, and you all are aware of what's happening over here. To avert your eyes from the food, briefly. If we have another question, I'll certainly take it. If we've exhausted, I think we certainly have gotten huge value and input and patience and tolerance from our students here. So I'm happy to wrap it if there isn't any other burning issue. Graham.
Sorry, I don't mean to hog, but I have a burning question, and I often quote research that's happening at the University of Oxford. It's to do with young people's interaction with social media and the web and so on, and the challenging of the conventional wisdom about the term digital native and digital immigrant, and the idea being that there's this huge generational divide between young people who were born into social media and old people who kind of migrated to it. And I think that division is being challenged now, and people talking in different terms about how people engage. And young people engage in different ways digitally and have different digital identities and so on. So my question to you is, do you respond positively to being typified as Generation X or Y, or the digital generation, or the natives? Or do you find that meaningful? Are you all similar in that respect, or are there differences between you?
Yeah, I'd say I think it's a generalization, because I'm 26, and I much more prefer having conversations with people face to face as opposed to being on Facebook or Twitter or things like that. But I've also found that it is quite useful, because at UNSW we have Moodle, and there's been a lot of interactions and discussions that have sort of gotten started on that forum, which helps students who are not able to maybe sort of put forth their opinions in front of a lot of people. So I think it's useful, but I think, yeah, I think it would be a generalization to say that everybody is the same, because people utilize it, but I think on different levels, and are comfortable with it, but at different levels.
I enjoy that tag a little bit, because, I mean, I wouldn't say I enjoy it, but I think it's something we add to a workplace. It's something where, in a hospital situation, again, I'm going back to that, the older doctors are fantastic with their medicine. They know everything, and you know relatively little. But this is something you can bring them. And perhaps I'm a person who engages a lot with technology. I love my technology. But it's something I feel I can contribute to them. They were collecting, for example, all their data on paper. And this is thousands of patients, and then someone would sit next to a computer and upload that on Excel. And I said, there's 1,000 free applications, you can do that on a tablet. And they looked at me like I was Einstein. But so I just think that sometimes those things, it can sort of give you a little bit of strength on how you can contribute to an existing workplace practice.
Yeah, going back to what I said earlier, I think there's definitely a lot of potential in technology and looking into how best it can be used. But again, I don't think technology should be seen as in itself something superior.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think we should be generalised, but it's very important, obviously, to have technology. And as Nani said, it shouldn't always be used just because it's there. And this, you see this like all over like the world with like businesses trying to use technology just because they feel like they're going to gain something from having a Twitter or Instagram account or something, when then it actually adds nothing. And I think we do have that knowledge, as Ish was saying, about that we know that this isn't going to do something, and we do have a greater extent of knowledge, but I don't think we're different in the fact that that's what makes us. Like I think that we do have a great understanding perhaps, but it doesn't need to be the whole, just us, yeah.
Just a last point. I think going from what Dush was saying, it was very interesting, because that could actually be a learning that happens sort of, from student to teacher and teacher to student, vice versa, whereas you incorporate the sort of the apps or the technology that we sort of know about and incorporate in the classroom learning, and sort of go about different assessments maybe that could utilize those forums in a better manner. And I think that could be like a two-way street and be potentially very useful.
It's a really nice note to end on from Steffi in terms of that partnership piece and learning from each other. And this session has very much exemplified the learning from each other in terms of your time has been really valuable and really useful to us, and your input has been hugely insightful on a number of themes, because we drifted a small bit there, and you've engaged we didn't, the dashboards and the databases, so that's been really, really grateful that you've been able to, and again, it speaks to your abilities and your articulate and very mature way that you've dealt with the session with us. So on your behalf, guys, can I thank Steffi, can I thank Douche, Jake and Nanny for their time this afternoon, and maybe you'll show your appreciation.